So today we're going to talk about bigger, bolder, braver content. But before we do that, we're going to talk about this book here, Charlotte's Web. Raise your hand if you've ever read Charlotte's Web. Awesome. That's a lot of the room. I'm not an analytics person, so I'm going to say that's like 98.27%. That was just a quick eyeball, Andy Crestodina. If you don't know the book, Charlotte's Web is a story about a barn spider by the name of Charlotte and her friendship with a little pig named Wilbur. It was written in 1952 by a guy named E.B. White. And the story opens with the best line in literature anywhere, and not just children's literature. I'd say actually literature period, like any novel ever written. It opens with a little girl sitting at the breakfast table by the name of Fern Arable. And the opening line is, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" She's looking across out the window at the field where she sees her father walking, striding across the field, and he's carrying an axe. So Fern asks her mother, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" Her mother tells her that their family pig in the barn had had a litter of piglets the night before, and her father was going out to kill the smallest pig because there wasn't enough, the mom didn't have enough time, basically, for the little pig. It wasn't really time, but I'm sugarcoating it because I don't want you guys to get too upset this early. You know what I mean? Okay. So she tells her he's going out to kill the pig. So Fern flips out. She runs out and she says to her dad, like she's pulling on the axe there, she's like, "Don't kill the smallest pig." He explains why. She says, "Well, give it to me. Let me raise it." So her dad gives Fern the pig. She names it Wilbur, and she raises it in the family barn. She nurtures it, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows. And eventually it grows too big to stay in the arable barn anymore. So it's sold to Fern's uncle, a guy by the name of Homer Zuckerman, who lives down the street. And that's where Wilbur lives for the next few months. He makes friends there. He's having a pretty good life. Until one day, the old sheep, he's kind of the thug of the barn. You know, he's kind of a jerk. And so the sheep says to Wilbur, actually, I picture the sheep like he's kind of leaning up against the farm and he's like, "Hey, kid." And Wilbur's like, "Yeah?" He's like, "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you?" Wilbur's like, "No, why?" And he goes, "They're going to kill you. They're just fattening you up for Christmas dinner." So Wilbur's like, "What?" He freaks out. He's like, "I don't want to die. I'm happy here in the Zuckerman barn. I want to live here forever." And so it's Charlotte, the spider in the center there, who devises a plan to save Wilbur's life. And her plan is to write words in her web to make Wilbur seem spectacular. Her research assistant, I think of it as like the SEO consultant for this job, you know, is the guy on the far end there. That's Templeton the rat. Templeton the rat is the one who goes down to the dump, sorts through all the information down there, and pulls out relevant keywords. This actually happened. Brings it back to Charlotte to weave into her web. It's not clear in the story, in the book itself, where this actually takes place. But it turns out that it's an actual place. Zuckerman's farm is an actual farm. And it's up in Brooklyn, Maine. And it was actually the farm where E.B. White, the author, lived. So I didn't know it was a real place until a Facebook friend messaged me on Facebook, and he told me that this farm was for sale. E.B. White died in the 1980s. Another family bought it. That family was now ready to sell. They were ready to pass it on. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to buy that barn. I was like, I'm gonna get that. E.B. White has always been my literary hero. I was like, I need that barn. It's 5 hours north of Boston. I live in Boston, 5 hours north. So one day last summer, my son Evan and I got in the car and we drove 5 hours up to Brooklyn, Maine to look at E.B. White's house. It is a spectacular property. The day that we showed up, this is what it looked like. Amazing, right? It's this amazing 12-room farmhouse. It's on 14 acres. It's right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. It's got like 2,000 feet of shoreline, which is like really, really incredible. In the book itself, there's a barn that's in the back of the house, and that barn is still there. And in the story, Fern is swinging on the Zuckerman swing that's on the barn. This is what it looks like. She's going like into the barn and then out of the barn, and into it and out of it. And there's this like lovely lyrical passage that he writes about. That day that Evan and I were touring E.B. White's property, Evan did the same thing. He was like in the barn and out of the barn that day. So that's Evan. We call him King Firstborn. Because he's firstborn, and he thinks he's the king. Underneath the barn, there's actually where the pig pen was, there's a little replica of Charlotte is still there. They put a little like sort of homage to Charlotte right there. But most special of all to me as a writer, you know, E.B. White, as I said, was my literary hero. Most special of all to me was the writer's shed where E.B. White wrote. I know, right? All the writers in the room were like, yeah, oh my God. Like you can see the water just beyond that. It was amazing. Just a short walk, little bucolic path from the house. This is where E.B. wrote 12 of his 14 books. E.B. White wrote Charlotte's Web, of course. He also wrote Stuart Little, if you know that book. He wrote Trumpet of the Swan, all children's books. But he also was the co-author with William Strunk of The Elements of Style. Do you guys know The Elements of Style? Yeah. It's like, I wrote Everybody Writes and as a way to sort of update the elements of style. You know, I wanted to think of it as a kind of elements of style for a content marketing age. So again, huge literary hero. That's what it looked like that day. This is what the inside looked like when E.B. White wrote there. Do you see that like wooden bench there? He wrote on a very simple wooden table, wooden barrel. You can see the Atlantic Ocean just out the window. So that was what it looked like in the 1970s when this photo was taken. This is what it looked like that day. Like the same bench, the same table, the same wooden barrel. It's like the same little ashtray on the table. That's my dog Abby. She was with us that day. I call her the favorite. I don't know why. Just a little nickname I dreamed up. I had a moment sitting on that seat. Like at one point, the realtor leaves the room, Evan leaves the room, they're out touring the dock, and I was alone in E.B. White's cabin. And I sat on that wooden bench, and I'm in this sort of rarefied air at that point, right? There's all this, I don't know, like incredible inspiration around me. And the thing that was in my head was like, my ass is sitting where E.B. White's ass sat. Because that's the kind of profound thought that I have all the time. That's the best I could do. So why am I telling you this story? How can my obsession with E.B. White and with this house make you a kick peach communicator? And I'm saying kick peach, by the way, because we all know what that's emoji speak for, right? And this is a family show, so we're keeping it clean. So how can my obsession make you a kick peach communicator? Why do I care so much about this, and why am I sharing it with you today? It's two reasons. Number one is the story itself. Like, who has read it, actually, the E.B. White's book? Who has read it in the past 5 years? No. Did I say Strunk and White? Now I'm getting confused. Did I say Charlotte's Web? Who has read Charlotte's Web in the past 5 years? Oh, wow, you have. That's amazing. To your kids, right? Yeah. It's an amazing book. If you have not read it as an adult, whether to your kids or not, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful story. It's very spare, it's told in very spare language, but it's really evocative. And reading it as an adult, well, you'll sort of get a sense of how perfect this story is. I think it's like an incredible work of art, and not just as a children's story, and not as children's literature, but just in general. But the second reason is the spider herself, Charlotte, is really a great inspiration to all of us here today, because she was essentially the world's best content marketer. And Wilbur was the brand. Think about this for a second. All of us in this room, as marketers, as business owners, are trying to drive some kind of action with the content that we're producing. Charlotte wasn't trying to get you to download a white paper or sign up for an email list or like attend a webinar. She had to save a life. That's how high the stakes were for her. So it wasn't about any of those sort of marketing kind of activities. She had to save this brand's life. She focused relentlessly on Zuckerman. That's the audience here. There's a lot of people who found out about what was going on at the Zuckerman barn. There's a lot that happened. But she was not concerned with any of that. Charlotte wasn't. All she thought about relentlessly was Zuckerman. How can she affect change with him? That's all she really cared about. And you can see it when you read it now as an adult, which I hope many of you do after this. And by the way, I might have brought some copies with me to give away as a prize. I don't know how. It's kind of like love, you know, like when you see it, you know it. So that's what I'm going with, right? So it happens throughout the book. You'll see it when you read it as an adult. Very early on in the book, when she writes "some pig," the first word that she writes in the web, a miracle has happened, Zuckerman says, right on our farm, and we have no ordinary pig. What did he have to do with this? Like nothing. But suddenly he's like thinking it's all about him. Charlotte is making him feel like it's about him. She's writing about the pig. He sees himself in that. Later on, she writes "terrific," and suddenly he's getting like influencer outreach involved, right? Media relations. Edith, you better phone the reporter in the Weekly Chronicle. There isn't a pig in the state that's as terrific as our pig. Again, it's about Zuckerman. He thinks it's about him. Later, when Charlotte writes "radiant," he says, "How's that for a pig?" Mr. Zuckerman would ask, "Well pleased with himself." What does he have to do with any of this? Nothing. That pig is radiant, he says. So then when she gets to humble, he's like all in. Like there's no way that this pig is ever going to die, because Zuckerman has invested so much of his own sort of self in the fact that he owns this incredible creature. So let's look at this from a funnel perspective. Okay, this is like a basic marketing funnel, very often B2B funnel, right? Awareness, consideration, decision, retention. It's all here. When you read this, you'll see it. It's all here. He's first aware of the fact, like, wow, this is incredible. That's some pig. And then all the way down, you can sort of see him getting more and more and more invested until he's not just a retained customer. He basically starts telling everybody about it. He goes to the next level. I think that Charlotte is the biggest, boldest, bravest content marketing ever. This is the biggest integrated marketing campaign ever as well, because content was a part of it, but it started with sort of crisis communication from a PR perspective, right? This pig is going to die. We got to do something here, people. We got to mobilize. Right, let's all get together. Let's figure this out. So there was a PR component to it. There's SEO with the rat, as I mentioned. There's content. There was also media relations, you know, that outreach to the Weekly Chronicle. All this stuff was going on at the same time. So this seems like a very simple children's story. Or does it? Not so much anymore. There's also a little bit of propaganda in here. Like, I know we marketers don't really like to talk about that, but there was a little bit of that going on. It wasn't completely true, what she was doing. But what I really love about this story is that even though the title of this book is Charlotte's Web, it's purportedly about her and the web, she's actually the humble one. She's never part of anything. She's always behind the scenes. She's always in service to the brand, and she's always thinking about Zuckerman, the audience. She almost disappears. And actually, reading it as a kid, and maybe some of you had this thought too, did you ever wonder why no one ever thought that the spider was special? Did anybody ever feel that way? Yeah. I used to like sit there and say, how come no one isn't, like, what? Why isn't the pig and Zuckerman and I? Anyway, because she's the humble one. She is not really part of the story at all. So let's talk about this from a content marketing perspective. I think Charlotte's Web is basically the best content marketing playbook that any of us here could ever read. There's a few lessons in it. Number one, move to Maine, man. Just like pack up and go to Maine, because there's some magic stuff happening up there. I don't mean this actually, I mean this metaphorically. I think we all want to be storytellers first and marketers second. So think of the story first and marketing second. E.B. White moved to Maine because he said at the time he was oppressed by deadlines, he felt watered down by institutional consensus. He was living and working in New York City, and he felt like people were always telling him what to do. He felt very uninspired. So he packed up his young family in the 1930s and moved to Brooklyn, Maine. He said at the time, I was unhappy with me. Some sort of drastic action seemed the only solution. Literally, he moved to Maine. But I think all of us here need to metaphorically move to Maine, because I think we are also in a little bit of a drastic action moment ourselves as marketers. This is kind of our bloated rat moment, if you will. I thought this would get a bigger laugh, no? Because I thought this was freaking hilarious when I was putting it together. I was like, look at that rat. That's like how Andy was feeling last night after the bar, right? Amanda thought that was really true. So why do I think this is a bloated rat moment? It's because 35% of us, according to some recent research that Marketing Profs, my company, did with the Content Marketing Institute, found that just 35% of us know that our content strategy is effective. So just with 3 in 10 of us, or 1 in 3 of us, know that our content is actually doing what we need it to do. It's actually driving business for our companies. It's actually meeting its objective and its goals, right? At the same time, though, 85% of the most successful marketers are thinking about quality over quantity. A lot of us are still thinking about quantity. It's about putting as much stuff out there as we can instead of really focusing on the quality of what we're producing, right? We're just like mailing stuff out. We're just like writing blog posts. We're just producing webinars. We're just like putting it all out there time after time after time, and it's not really meeting what it needs to do. He's fine. He's okay. It's good though, right? He never catches it, by the way. Just a little spoiler there. Never, ever. I talk to marketers all the time who start their content strategy here, who start their content marketing efforts here. We need a piece of content for, because we have a blog post that we always publish every Tuesday, right? Because we publish a new post every Tuesday. Because we have a webinar that we produce quarterly. Because we have a white paper that we do twice a year, or a research study. We need a piece of content for that. But instead, I think that's the wrong place to think about where to start your content strategy, right? I think instead you want to start it the opposite place. What does your customer need from you? What does your audience need from you? What will they value? What will they miss if they don't get? What's the value that you can deliver to them that will really mean something to them? That's where we want to start the strategy. I think that Wilbur's story is grounded in what I call pathological empathy for the customer, in this case, Zuckerman. Charlotte really got into Zuckerman's head and thought, what is going to make, bless you, what is going to make him feel better, right? What is going to make him feel bigger, a bigger part of the community? What is going to add value to his life? And so I think that pathological empathy is where we all need to start too. And what do I mean by that? I mean, not just having a sort of vague sense about what your customer needs or who they are, but really thinking about them at a much deeper level. of really getting inside their skin, of really understanding what their pain points are. How can you help them? What do they need from you? This is my friend Corey O'Laughlin. She is here with her husband Mike and their 2 kids. She lives in West Palm Beach, Florida. Can we talk about their outfits? You guys are thinking it too, right? It's a lot. I know, it's a lot. I know it seems like this is a holiday or like a Easter or something. It's Tuesday. They're going to Costco. That's basically how they look all the time. So Corey texted me not too long ago, and she texted me a website called doyourpartner.com. Just like no words, just sent me this website. And if you're wondering what Do Your Partner is about, it's about doing your partner. Okay? It's about those 2 things. There's all kinds of stuff on there. I'm not going to get too into it because I'm getting embarrassed too. But it's basically about how do you reconnect with your partner, right? How do you actually reconnect as people, as parents? It was published by a baby food company by the name of Plum Organics. Plum Organics did some original research with a woman by the name of Esther Perel. This is Esther. She's a family psychotherapist. They found lots of interesting information about sort of the state of modern parenting. That was the focus of their research report. Things like 70% of parents feel guilty when they're away from their kids for a night out. Or when they go out, they spend most of their time talking about their kids. Or how Valentine's Day, which used to be a couple's holiday before they had kids, now becomes a family holiday. It becomes a family celebration. Have you been in Target around Valentine's Day? Anybody here? It's like, yeah, it's a family holiday now, right? It's like send your kids Valentines. It's true. So they published Do Your Partner because they thought, how can we actually fix this problem? How can we remind parents why they got together to begin with? How can we strengthen that bond between the 2 of them? And so they published Do Your Partner as a way to kind of do that. It has like a Barry White soundtrack to it. You getting the vibe? At which point Esther is like, guys, what the heck does this have to do with baby food? I'm going to break it down for you right now. More sex. You ready? Means happier parents. That's right. Who have more kids. Wait for it. Who eat more baby food. It's like, like what? Think about this from a marketing perspective. Like the Gerber baby just had an aneurysm, right? It's like, that's not the way that most companies talk about baby food. That's not the narrative at all. But Do Your Partner is not just a one-off kind of campaign, right? It's not just a microsite that they put up and called it a day. Instead, this is actually part of a bigger story that Plum Organics is telling. The story is parenting unfiltered. Let's have a real conversation about the current state of modern parenting, right? Let's talk about the real lives of modern parents. That's what it's all about. And Parenting Unfiltered has a bigger footprint, right? Do Your Partner campaign was one piece of it, but Parenting Unfiltered is the bigger program. So they do things like this. I mean, just look at that photo. That basically says everything you need to know right there. Like, that's real talk, folks. That's real talk. Parenting is hard, right? It's hard to go from a couple to becoming a family. It's hard to make that transition. That's really what they're talking about. They're finding fun, engaging ways to do it, though, because they want to change people's perceptions of Plum Organics itself, ultimately, right? And so they're telling it in various ways. Their new campaign is called, as part of the Parenting Unfiltered umbrella, is called Keeping It Together in Year One, because that first year is such a stressful time. Yes, it's awesome and it's wonderful and kids are fantastic, but it's very stressful. So that's the story that they wanted to tell. That's sort of the emotional connection that they wanted to make with parents. So I'm playing a little clip of a parent talking about that struggle.
People will call me an involved dad, but there's no such thing as an involved mom. Who says that? No one says that. So I feel like the bar for dads is set so low that you can trip over it. You take your kid to the supermarket, you push them on a swing, be like, oh my gosh, you're the greatest dad ever. Where moms can do anything, no matter what it is, how spectacular it is. And like, ah, she's supposed to do that. Or they'll nitpick her. We shouldn't get props for that. This is something that we're supposed to be doing. And there's no such thing as an involved dad. It should just be a dad.
Hell yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm always surprised. This is the second time I've shown that video, and it's like the first time, like, all dads in the room, I feel like should be, yeah! Like, you should be standing up. No? Are you not that guy? Because I thought you were. I was feeling it. So keeping it together is the second iteration of that. Again, but remember, it all maps back to parenting unfiltered, and this is a story that they tell everywhere. Other parents have picked it up. They have a great influencer program. They do amazing influencer outreach to sort of understand how this is playing out over time. They know from the research what the facts are, but you know, they also talk to real parents in real time to figure out what is actually resonating. What I really love about this is that this is not just corporate speak. You know, and I am a marketer, and I say this with love in my heart. But I can tell when a marketing program is kind of BS-y. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes I see it and I'm like, nah, it just doesn't feel real. It doesn't resonate. But this is totally real because Plum Organics lives and breathes it. They really believe it. They know it. And they do the work. They dig up the data. They figure it out. Katie Sobel at Plum Organics told me that whether it's product development or messaging, it starts with an intimate knowledge of and camaraderie with our consumer as a parent and as a person. I love that camaraderie with. I hardly ever hear that from marketers. Usually they talk about audience, targeting segments. They talk about things in almost the third person. They don't talk about camaraderie with. How do we actually market with our customers? And to me, that's a huge mind shift. It's not a subtle, small play on language. I think it's a huge mind shift. It's a mindset shift. Plum Organics knows this. They know why it resonates because, again, they have the data to back it up. They do the research. They know what they're talking about. But they also have a very robust social listening program. They're constantly listening to what's going on social media to tap into these trends, to tap into the sort of modern state of parenting. But they also rely on their instincts as marketers, as people. And I feel like data-driven stories are amazing. Data can very often be the bedrock of what we produce, of what we say, of what we publish. But I also think that our instincts count for a lot. Like, we know. We went into this business because we love it, because we care. And so don't discount your own instinct because you don't have a little number to prove it, right? I think our instincts count for something too. So that's why it's put up here as a formula. That's why there's a multiplication sign between each one, because I think you need elements of all three to get the results that you need, that you want. So I asked Corey, why did you share that site with me? Like, why did you text me that? And she's like, oh, this is going to be in a presentation. And I said, no. Why would you think that, Corey? All right, she was right. It is. So she said, at first I was shocked, but then I shared it with like 14 people, and I posted it to my mom group on Facebook. She said, I shared it because it resonated. It was the truth of the crazy stage of life that me and my friends are in. It made me think they get it. That's camaraderie with right there. That's like squad goals. You know what I mean? Like T-Swiftie fans, you know what I'm saying? That's like squad goals with your own brand and your customers. That, to me, is like the place where we all want to be as brands. I think that in marketing, we hear a lot about how we need to be part of the conversation. You need to be on social media to be part of the conversation. I don't think that's the right approach. I think you actually want to think about leading the conversation. Because I think the smartest companies aren't just following along, right? They're not just participating, I think they're leading. And that, to me, is a huge differentiator. Okay, we good? You guys are quiet. Are you enjoying this? Yes. All right, good, just making sure. There's a little heart-to-heart there for a second. All right, my second point here today is to find the axe. What is the problem that your customers, your audience has? And how can you help them address that, right? What's the axe? The axe in Charlotte's Web is a sort of threat hanging over the book the entire time. You don't know that it's actually going to be okay for Wilbur until the very end. It is, by the way. I think I said that already, right? Did I say it already? Yeah. Well, it's a kid's book. Of course he's not going to die. So you want to find that axe, right? You want to find the issue, find the problem. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Fern, who I think of her as like the original influencer of the farm community. You know, she's like the OG influencer of like farm life everywhere. Because like without her, this story falls apart. So just saying. My friend Thomas Kellner he's the editor-in-chief of GE Reports, of General Electric Reports. I think the GE Reports is basically like the most brilliant brand magazine out there. It's a fantastic site that I think we can model a lot of what we do on from both a content marketing perspective, from a PR perspective, from a research perspective. I mean, it's an incredible publication. But this is what Thomas told me. This is where he grounds everything. He said, you need to find the challenge. That's where the story lives. You can't have a story without a problem. You can't have a story without an axe. My favorite organization who does this incredibly well is the Humane Society of Silicon Valley. And can we give a shout out to that sexy little beast? Look at that man. He's like, adopt me. You know you want to. I love to talk about the Humane Society of Silicon Valley because they are a pet shelter. Do you know how big the marketing budget is for a pet shelter? It's like, if you go home and you search in the cushions of your couch and you come up with whatever, 12 cents, that's basically probably more than they have. They don't have a lot, but they do a lot with what they have. A few reasons why I love the Humane Society of Silicon Valley is because they really are telling a different kind of story. Like, just shout out an adjective. When you think about the narrative of a pet shelter, like, what's the word you think of when you think of a pet shelter? Just shout it out to me. Rescue. Rescue, yeah. You must be like an SEO guy, because that's like very specific. So like adjective, like what's the word? Sad. Yeah, I heard somebody say sad, desperate. You know why? It's because it's those darn PSAs. You know? It's like they come on and it's like there's a Sarah McLachlan soundtrack. Spend all your life waiting for a second chance. And then like they shoot the animal, the critter, like behind a fence, you know? And it's like it's like sitting in a patch of dirt. You know, it's like dusty and the dog is like sitting there and it's like, oh, I feel so bad. That's awful. And so that's your time to get up and get a snack, right? Because it's like, I can't handle this. I don't want to watch that. The Humane Society of Silicon Valley was like, that's not the story that we want to tell. Because they think that pets are ridiculous and they're joyful and they add a lot to people's lives. They said, let's tell that story. And so even their pet listings are very sort of fun. They take a whole different approach, right? They almost write them as like Craigslist ads, you know? I mean, it's like really amazing. The other reason why I love the way that they market, though, is because it's also based in data. But they don't have the money to do like some original research with Esther Perel. Instead, they just look at annual giving numbers in the US. They found that out of $358 billion in annual giving, less than 1% goes to animal-related causes. So that's just not pet shelters, that's any animal-related cause, like a wildlife foundation, for example. So they thought, how can we change that? Remember, the story they're telling is that pets are crazy and ridiculous and fun. How can we change that? Because we also need to drive donations. So they said, how can we change that narrative from people or animals, like you can give to people or you can give to animals, to people and animals? How do we bring those two things closer together? Because when you give to animals, you're also enriching the lives of people. That's the story that they want to tell. So they knew about this one guy who had adopted a shelter dog from the Humane Society of Silicon Valley. His name was Eric O'Gray. He's an appliance salesman. They knew this story, and so they thought, how can we tell more of these stories? How can we find more of these stories to tell? And so they produced a 6.5-minute documentary called Eric and Petey. I'm not going to play you the whole thing because I'm already worried about time. But I did cut a little element of this just to show you what it's all about.
When people see a photo of who I was 5 years ago, they can't and often don't believe that it's me. My weight had crept up to 340 pounds. My blood pressure was through the roof, super high cholesterol. I had type 2 diabetes, and I was taking over $1,000 worth of medications a month. And I just felt really uncomfortable around other people. I became separated from society, and I just stopped living. I went on a business trip. You know how small airplane seats are? I could barely squeeze into one, and basically I'd spill over both sides. They had to delay the flight because they didn't have a seatbelt extension that would fit me. There was a gentleman next to me, and he just looked in complete disgust, and he looked at me and he goes, "I'm going to miss my connection because you're too fat." That really was my bottom point. That's the point that I really decided that, you know, I'm either going to die or I have to do something. I looked in the phone book and I found a nutritionist near me. One of the first things that she asked me to do was to go adopt a shelter dog. It would force me to go outside. It would force me to become more socially interactive. So I went to the local shelter, and I remember telling the lady I would like an obese, middle-aged dog so that I would have something in common with him. And when I walked into the room, we both looked at each other with like a look of, really?
Isn't that so good? You love that? I love that. This thing went crazy for Humane Society of Silicon Valley. I mean, viral was not the goal, but they hoped to find at least 100 stories. The goal was to find 100 other people who had adopted shelter pets and to tell their stories. Instead, it did go crazy. They ended up with, over 400 stories that they could then tell. And they realized that, wow, this thing actually struck a nerve. This actually resonates. So they continue it to this day. That was 2016 when they started this program. It's now into 2018. They now have a microsite called mutualrescue.org. They just released a new film called Mike and Abby. Fantastic example of taking something as a sort of test case and then blowing it up even more, and not just changing because the quarter changed or the year changed and you have to spend new budget on another program, right? This resonated, let's go deeper with that. I think using your data is the foundation for your story is hugely effective. Is anyone here from Levenfeld-Perlstein right here in Chicago? Anyone? 0%, okay. Levenfeld-Perlstein is a Chicago law firm. They looked at their Google Analytics and realized that their attorney profile pages were among the most visited of their website. And so they thought, how can we actually tell a different story on those pages? Those are really important pages for our site, for our business. And so they hired a film crew to come in and not just film the partners talking about pedestrian kind of lawyerly sorts of things. Instead, they talked about things like, what's your most prized possession in your office and why do you love it so much? So they told a different kind of story with their attorneys, right? Because those were important pages. That's just doing something super simple, taking data, looking at your data and figuring out how can we use that to tell a better story? How can we actually use that to drive our business? Bolder stories change the narrative. It's exactly what Plum Organics did. It's exactly what Humane Society Silicon Valley did. It's exactly what Charlotte did. Which leads me to my last point here today. And I know I'm running short on time. Do I have time to go into this? All right, good. All right, so if you'd said no, I would have been crushed, by the way, just saying. Thank you. You made me nervous. Observe like Fern. Throughout the book, throughout Charlotte's Web, the narrative is driven by beautiful writing. At one point, Fern is talking about how the grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Like, I've edited marketers for a long time, for 25 years. I can not remember the last time that I had a marketer add any sort of element like this. Add a second sense to what you're doing. Don't just say what something looks like. Tell me what it feels like, it smells like. Tell me what it just, give it more life, right? Give it more personality. Just add another sense to anything that you're producing. It makes a huge impact. I think it's a great way to add voice, too. And I think that tone of voice, brand voice, is your bravest asset. It is vastly undervalued by most brands, by most marketers, because it really signals who you are, and more importantly, how you do the work. I think we think about brand voice only as a way to communicate with our customers in their language, but really it needs to be just as much about us. We need to signal, how are we to deal with? What is our brand voice saying about us as a brand, as a company? Aaron Draplin has a design agency in Portland, Oregon. And this is from his Instagram feed. He does a great job with using brand voice. Let me share a little bit of this with you. I'll commonly inquire. He lives in Portland, Oregon, remember. Can I get some yellow mustard? And every time it's some put-out, mouth-breathery reply, I'll have to check. Our mustard is an aioli-inspired mustard infused with Peruvian honey, small batch dingleberries, with a dong sniff of sea salt. That is the most Portland, Oregon sentence ever. If you have ever ordered a sandwich in Portland, Oregon, you have lived this moment right here. I read this and I was like, that is so beautiful. What's a dong sniff? No one really knows. I looked it up on Merriam-Webster. They're just like, beats me. Like, giant emoji. Don't know. But you know what is in Merriam-Webster? Dingleberry. I'm sorry, but I had to find out too. All right? You guys have to know. I'm sorry. The second place where I think we can apply brand voice a lot more effectively than we are right now is email. And my friend Joanna Wiebe, who's standing in the back of the room, is going to be talking about email later on today. But email, I think, is vastly undervalued as a way to communicate. And I know that sounds like such an old school thing to say, but there's a very specific reason why I feel that way. Actually, there's two reasons why. The first is because I think email is the only place where we as people are mostly in control, right? I say only, it's really the only place that we're mostly in control. Because as marketers, we're dealing with algorithms everywhere else, right? We're dealing with trying to make something, trying to put enough money toward it on Facebook so that people actually notice it, they can pay attention to it. But email is the place where the people who have opted in to hear from you, they're the ones who are in control. We are all in control of our inboxes, much more so than we can be on social media. So why aren't we thinking about this? Why aren't we thinking about this at a sort of deeper level? I think especially email newsletters are a vastly undervalued opportunity. And I use that word opportunity with true sincerity. I think in marketing, we tend to think about newsletters as a way to tell people what we want to say. Right? We have news that we want to share. We have something that we need to drive signups for. We have something that we need to get out there. We focus on the news part of that word. But I think the better way to think about the word newsletter is not thinking about it as a distribution strategy, which is what our default is in marketing. So it's not about the news, it's about the letter. It's an opportunity to communicate in a very sincere, real, personal way with the people you are trying to connect with. Every week, Anand Sanwal at a company called CB Insights sends me a letter. CB Insights is a data company. He informs mostly in the technology space. So every day he sends me a letter that says, "Hi there." And then it's full with lots of interesting stories about the state of data and technology. And it ends every day with, "I love you." So awesome. Every day he loves me. Every day he tells me that. The other reason that I think this is so effective, so this is actually driven I think partly his personal voice, his personal approach is mostly why this has grown like magic beans. Like in 2010, he had 1,400 subscribers. Just last week, that number has been bested. He now has 500,000 subscribers. And it's because it's useful, right? It's a great piece of information, but it also feels very personal. It has a completely different feel than most other newsletters out there. The other reason why I love this is that look at that email address, anansanwal@cbinsights.com. It doesn't come from newsletter at, it doesn't come from marketing at, or you know who I really, really, really hate to get an email from? Do not reply, right? That hurts. That's like a burn. That's a marketing burn right there. That is such a missed opportunity, I think, because he's letting people know this is a real letter from a real person. He's the CEO. He's not even like the CMO or like just a marketing director. He's the CEO. My daughter Caroline is a college student, and this past summer she interned at a marketing agency outside of Boston where we live. And it was her first marketing job. And do you know what one of her weekly responsibilities was at the marketing agency that she worked for? It was to write the weekly newsletter. Caroline is beautiful and she's brilliant. She's amazing. But you know who should not be writing? You know who shouldn't be doing it? Caroline. The intern should not be writing your weekly newsletter. It's a missed opportunity to actually say something substantive in a very specific, hollowed space. Lots of businesses write letters to shareholders, but none are probably more anticipated than the one that Warren Buffett writes to Berkshire Hathaway investors. His letters are so widely anticipated, in fact, that like people go bananas for it, not just like for the report of Berkshire Hathaway, but the letter itself. And the letter itself gets press. And the letter itself has actually written books. Not just one book, not just two books, but 3 books that his letters have written. What's more, Warren Buffett's letters have inspired other people's books. I gotta say that slowly. Warren Buffett's letters have inspired other people's books. Yes, this is actually the funniest line down here. This book was not written by Warren Buffett. Like, you know, like some publisher made him put that on there, right? This is like content marketing inception, isn't it? It's like the letter gets pressed, the letter gets like a book, letter gets bylines. The reason why I'm sharing this with you, why I think it's relevant for all of us today, is because this letter goes out to lots of people, but the tone of it is so different than any other letters to shareholders. Where does that S go? Letters to shareholders. I don't know. Talk to me later. But the reason I like that his voice in there is very simple, right? The way that he communicates is very simple. It's also very accessible, and it's a little playful. Like, he makes jokes in there. There's sort of like side comments. It's a very sort of playful, warm approach. This goes out to tens of thousands of Berkshire Hathaway investors. It's written its own books, right? But do you know who Warren writes to? When he writes these letters, he writes to this gal. This is Doris. This is his sister Doris. And when he sits down every year to write the Berkshire Hathaway letter to shareholders, he writes to Doris. He does this, he said, because Doris is smart and she reads a lot. She doesn't know all the financial jargon, but she doesn't really want to be treated as a child either. I try to say on paper, he says, what I'd tell her about the business if we sat down for an afternoon. Writing to Doris is a storytelling superpower. It's a writing superpower. It allows us all to sort of tap into that sort of loose, human, accessible, playful human voice. Think about that one person. Think about your own Doris. This is exactly what I do. I just started a new email newsletter, not from Marketing Profs, just from my own self at annhandley.com. Every other week, every other Sunday, I publish a newsletter. And I don't send it to 10,000 people who are on this list. Instead, I think about the one subscriber who I'm writing to that week. Maybe it's somebody who I met here. Maybe it's somebody that I talked to online or on Twitter or something. But I think about one person who I want to help, who I want to affect, who I want to change. So I don't think about 10,000, just like Warren doesn't think about anybody but Doris, right? It makes a huge difference in how you think. Writing to Doris matters because it means that you're not just emailing like a segment. You're not blasting a segment. This is a cool thing I want to tell that one person about. Writing to Doris helps the way that you curate your content as well. Instead of just posting a headline and a link, which I see all the time, instead, it's a headline, it's a link, and why this matters to you, why you should care. And then finally, it's not just a one-way, it's a two-way. Think of that Anand Sanwal, right? You can hit that and reply back to him directly because it's not a do not reply, it's not a newsletter at. It has a real accessible human face. So subtle, so important. It also means that you don't worry about that person who's not my Doris. You know, the person who's like not gonna connect with your content, this is the importance of tone of voice. It's as important to attract people to you as it is to repel people who are gonna be a terrible fit. So don't worry about not my Doris. Like this person who signed up for my own email newsletter recently, look at the email address they used, Neil. Low priority at Neil. Like, come on. Not even medium priority? Or like maybe some occasionally important priority? Nothing. Low priority. Or like Anand Sanwal, for example, recently did an A/B test on Twitter, and he shared the results of their own email newsletter. He shared the results on Twitter. He didn't do it on Twitter. It was an email A/B split test. The winning subject line was 35 websites that are ugly AF, which means as peach, yeah, as freaky. And so then he shares on Twitter about how some folks write in complaining that they're offended by the language of AF, and he's like, it's a free newsletter. Don't like it? Unsubscribe and move on. Like, hey, thanks, bye. Like, see ya. So are you talking to Doris, and are you not fretting about not my Doris, right? Don't worry about not my Doris. You don't have to worry about her. She doesn't matter. All right, my last little share here today is about, let's talk about video. Right, there's a lot of video sessions here today. We're talking a lot about video all day long. Voice matters here too. And here's an example of a piece of marketing content that I saw that really shows this in a really just tangible way. That's so great. Like, the editing is amazing, right? But did you notice that phrase, he did his best to put on a turn of speed? Like, that is so BBC, right? And it is so sloth, too. Like, he did his best. Put on a turn. They could have said he swam faster, but he didn't. Because they were trying to convey a different kind of thing, right? If the label falls off, if you were to cover up the logo on your website, on your social channels, on your emails, on anything, do you recognize you? Do this with your boss, your CEO, that hater of a client who's like, just get something out there. This is a hugely powerful thing to do. How are we using tone of voice in a way to differentiate ourselves? I think in marketing, we think about only the things that are right in front of us, right? All part of our editorial calendar, right? Everything that we can control. But I think we need to think a little bit more broadly, right? Everything the light touches is content. Everything our customer comes into contact with is potentially a piece of content. That should be telling the story. All right, are you guys wondering? What happened? Did you get the house? No. This is what happened. This guy from New York came in. They're always from New York. He came in from New York at the very last minute. He had like a wheelbarrow full of cash. He dumps it on the lawn of E.B. White's farmhouse, and he's like, see ya. You lost, Anne. Yeah, I know. It was very heartbreaking. I literally cried. But it's not going to keep me down, man, because it's like I have a new goal. This is my shed goals. I'm going to own this shed in 10 years. And until then, along with all of you, we're just going to work. Work. You see me, I do work. You see me do me dirt. So me better work. When you walk a lot. All right. Can we just talk for 1 second? Can we do this, though? Sir, I just want to just talk to you like from my heart for a second, okay? Can we do that? I know I shared a lot of things today. They're kind of like crazy and a little bit out there and very ambitious. I know the struggles that all of you have here. Like, I know that to change a comma on a thank you page, it has to go through 37 approvals, right? It's like, I live in that world too. I totally get it. But I also think that part of being bigger, braver, and bolder is up to all of us. I think we are all here because we are trying to be bigger, bolder, braver communicators and marketers. And that's what I want to really empower you to do. It's not about the marketing. It's not about making that bigger, braver, and bolder. It's about all of you being bigger, braver, and bolder leaders. Thank you so much, you guys.